What non-familial types of sexual relationships were banned under the law of Moses? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Leviticus on Walking Through the Bible.
Glory of His cross.
If you have a Bible with you, turn to Leviticus 18. We're going to be reading from verses 19 to 30. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Leviticus 18, beginning at verse 19. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness as long as she is in her customary impurity. Moreover, you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile yourself with her, and you shall not let any of your descendants pass through the fire to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is an abomination. Nor shall you mate with any animal to defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal to mate with it. It is a perversion. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation, or any stranger who dwells among you. For all these abominations the men of the land have done, who were before you, and thus the land is defiled, lest the land vomit you out when you defile it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever commits any of these abominations, the person who commits them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore you shall keep my ordinances, so that you do not commit any of these abominable customs, which were committed before you, and that you do not defile yourselves by them. I am the Lord your God. In our last lesson, we discussed some familial sexual relationships and marriages that would be banned under the law of Moses. I will not reiterate each of the types that were disallowed, but suggest you to listen to our last episode. If you're watching directly on YouTube, links to it can be found at the end of this video. But if you're watching on another platform, simply go to our website at www.eastendchurch.org and search for the Walking Through the Bible English Podcast tab under the Media tab, and you'll find the link to the episode there. From our modern eyes, we can discern a possible genetic reason as to why many of these familial relationships were banned. For instance, a brother and sister, if they were to have children together, share too close of a genetic link that would likely give rise to children who carry significant birth defects. This doesn't occur nearly as often when unrelated people marry because those harmful genes are more likely to be repressed if they are recessive genes. These diseases thus only appear when both parents carry those recessive genes. However, when close relatives marry, there is an increased likelihood that recessive genes are carried by both partners, hence the higher risk of birth defects. This wasn't true closer to the time of creation, as our genetic makeup was created perfect, but as God used disease to shorten our lifespan, our genetics were affected, making it necessary for these restrictions. However, even though we can find a genetic reason for God's restrictions, that is not the reason stated as to why God gave these restrictions here. For marrying one's sister-in-law, something banned here, does not carry with it an inherent genetic disadvantage. God considered it wickedness, and so if one was to be righteous, one would follow what God said. So yes, there might be a genetic component to God's design here. In truth, it is a righteousness versus wickedness issue. That is the stated reason, so the people had to accept God's judgment on the matter. Coming now to verse 19, we find that a man wasn't to have sex with a woman during her menstrual cycle. I'm not going to give any stated hygiene reasons as to why this might be wise, but recall from chapter 15 that a woman was unclean during this period of time. Anyone who touched her would also be unclean. Intentionally making yourself unclean in order to gratify some sexual urge you might have was not to be done. You would simply have to wait until the woman was clean again, which would normally be in about a week. And then you could return to having normal relationships with your wife. Chapter 15 did provide leniency for if someone was engaging in sexual intercourse when a woman's cycle initially began, but that was the only leniency. All time else, the end of this chapter provides that the punishment was you'd be cut off from among the people. This was a strict law that needed to be followed. Moving away from familial types of relationships, a man was not to have sexual relationships with his neighbor's wife. For in effect, that would be stealing from your neighbor. The same would be true of a wife was not to have sexual relations with their neighbor's husband. Some view this type of interpretation as degrading to women because they are viewed as property of another. But it should be noted that the Bible does speak of the husband and wife belonging to each other. The husband belongs to the wife just as the wife belongs to the husband. It's not an unequal relationship. It's an equal one. And it is one of possession. That's why adultery is sin. You're stealing from your neighbor. It was banned in Exodus 20 as part of the Ten Commandments, and it's banned here again. They also weren't to allow their children to pass through the fire to Molech, nor profane the name of God. This is often taken to mean that God is banning human sacrifice, and he is, but the phrasing here goes much further than that. They weren't to dedicate their children to Molech, a false god of the Ammonites. When we become Christians, we dedicate our lives to God. That is right, for he is the true God. Dedicating our lives to a false god, however, is wrong and sinful, and the children of Israel were not to do this. Homosexuality was also banned for the children of Israel to engage in. The condemnation of homosexuality doesn't begin with Moses. It predated Moses. We read of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed in part for this practice in Genesis 19. And as much as our society wants to normalize this behavior, and churches may be pressured into accepting it as righteous, even under the law of Christ, according to Romans 1, it is still seen as an abomination, and as such, is still sin. If therefore we want to be a Christian, we can't live in homosexuality. Otherwise, we won't be saved. This chapter concludes by telling us that bestiality is also an abomination. If anybody engaged in any of these things contained in this chapter, they were to be cut off from among the people. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Leviticus 19, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.